Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. I'm Brent, Holland. This afternoon, live on the phone from Jerusalem, Dr. Efraim Zuroff, world's leading Nazi hunter. His book, Operation Last Chance, One Man's Quest to Bring Nazi Criminals to Justice. 60 years after the end of World War II, not all those who were faithful to the Third Reich are dead. Some members of the Nazi Party and their collaborators are still alive. They are increasingly difficult to track down. Time is rapidly running out, but Efraim Zuroff won't give up. Launching Operation Last Chance in 2002, he spearheaded a vast public campaign to locate and bring to justice the worst suspected Nazi criminals. Also in our discussion, we talked about the growing anti-Semitism and resentment against Israel.
The charter of Hamas, which is the equivalent of their constitution, clearly calls for the elimination of the State of Israel. Their military policies of indiscriminately attacking Israeli civilian centers, cities like Sderot, Ashkelon, even as far as Ashdod, basically show there is absolutely no concern for human life. The way that they use their own people as human shields, for example, shows that there's absolutely no respect for the individual, no obligation to observe the common norms of human rights. And therefore, we find ourselves fighting against a group or a government, if you will, that has absolutely no scruples, no morals, and will do everything in its power to destroy us.
This afternoon, Dr. Efraim Zuroff, the world's leading Nazi hunter. His book, Operation Last Chance, One Man's Quest to Bring Nazi Criminals to Justice. Right now on Brent, Holland. Okay, off we go. Folks, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Dr. Efraim Zuroff, Nazi hunter at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. His latest book, Operation Last Chance, One Man's Quest to Bring Nazi Criminals to Justice. And I just want to let folks know that the book is readily available right across Canada, and any Chapters Indigo. Just to let you know, Efraim, Chapters is our version of Barnes Noble in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. It's available right across the country. Easy way to get it, as always, folks. Just go to the www.brenthollandshow.com website. Click on the book cover that's there beside today's guest. That'll take you right to Chapters Indigo online, where you can order it online at your own convenience, and it should be there within 24 to 48 hours. And it's a terrific book. I urge you all, and an important book. Now, let's talk about why this book is important, Efraim. One of the reasons why I'm doing this show, because I was kind of scared into a little bit of reality not too long ago when this show is syndicated, just to let you know, right across Canada through the universities / community radio stations right across the country. And a student came up to me, and we had Lydia Reich on. Lydia Reich is a Holocaust survivor. She was in the camps with Anne Frank. And the student asked me, who's your guest today? And I told her Lydia Reich, Holocaust survivor. And the student said, 22, 23-year-old young woman, very bright, by the way. She said, oh yeah, the Holocaust. What was that all about anyways? And it sent a chill down my spine, because today's generation, I don't think she is unique in her ignorance, they just have an apathy towards the Holocaust, and I'm terrified it's going to happen again from what I see what's going on in the world right now. Thus, this show. I was wondering if you could start us off and give a solid background on why it is essential work that you're doing to bring these war criminals to justice.
Well, I think the answer is fairly clear. We're talking about the worst tragedy in human history, a deliberate attempt to wipe a people off the face of the earth because they were considered unjustly the enemies of Germany, because they insisted on maintaining their own traditions and advocating ideas which were anathema to the Nazi movement, to the dictatorship that ran Nazi Germany. And obviously, bringing these people to justice sends, I think, a very powerful message that if you commit crimes like this, then there will always be someone who will make it their business to try and see to it that you're held accountable. And that message, of course, is aimed at the potential genocidists of tomorrow,
in hopes of a deterrent.
You're listening to The Brent Holland Show. For more information on today's guests, as well as free podcasts and downloads, please go to the www.brenthollandshow.com website, www.brenthollandshow.com.
I went on several internet blogs in doing some research for this show. Besides apathy, there seems to be a lot of condemnation against the work you're doing. A lot of people are saying, oh, they're so old, they're in their late 80s, early 90s, they're about to die, just let them die in peace. Why can we not allow that to happen?
Okay, I think we can sum it up with the following points. The first is that the passage of time in no way diminishes the guilt of the killers. Mm-hmm. If someone committed a crime in 1941 or 1942 and they're not brought to justice or haven't been brought to justice, they're just as guilty today as the day that they committed that crime. Now, if we had been able to bring them to justice in 1948 or 1958, I don't think anyone would have been skeptical. But the fact that quite a bit of time has passed since the crime doesn't change anything. Second point is that we don't think old age should protect people who committed murder and, in certain cases, even mass murder. Because if we were to limit prosecution based on age, and it doesn't matter now what that limit would be, whether it would be 80 or 90 or whatever, the practical implication would be that if you're lucky enough and or rich enough and or smart enough to elude justice until you reach that age, then you're off the hook. And that obviously is morally outrageous. And it also explains why, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been a country, any country, which has ever limited prosecution based solely on age. The third point is that I think it's very important, and this is a point that was always stressed by Mr. Wiesenthal, Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter, that we fulfill our obligation to the victims of the Nazis, and that obligation is to make a serious, comprehensive effort to try and find the people who turned these innocent men, women, and children into victims and hold their killers accountable. So when someone like Ivan Demjanjuk is put on trial, it's obviously part of our obligation to the 29,000 Jews who were murdered in the Sobibor death camp during the period from March until September 1943, when he served as a Wachman, an armed guard in that camp. I also want to add another point, which is that very often people assume that during the many years that have passed since the crimes were committed, these people have reached a better understanding, you could say, of the situation, and that they regret what they did. But I have to say that unfortunately that is not the case. And in all the cases that I've invested a lot of work in, there's never been a case of a Nazi war criminal who was in any way recalcitrant or expressed any regret or remorse. And if you take into consideration the fact that many of these people have lived most of their lives after the war in countries in which the Holocaust has often discussed. There are books, there are movies. Certainly in the last 20 years, the Holocaust has become a very commonly discussed subject. And you would imagine that under those circumstances, these people might have figured out that the crimes that they committed in their youth were actually part of this terrible thing called the Holocaust. And some of them might say, they might reach the conclusion, they might try and say, for example, we were brainwashed, we were silly young men, we didn't know what we were doing. But no one that I've ever encountered, or no case that I've dealt with any degree of intensity, has ever expressed any regret. And that, I think, is really shocking, and it's really very horrific.
I agree wholeheartedly. Folks, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Efraim Zuroff, live today from Israel. His book is Operation Last Chance, One Man's Quest to Bring Nazi Criminals to Justice. He is the world's foremost Nazi hunter, and you had mentioned Simon Wiesenthal before, and I know you work closely in tandem with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I was wondering if you could tell folks what the Simon Wiesenthal Center does. I was wondering if you can just give an overall view of the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the great work that they do.
The Simon Wiesenthal Center was established in 1977 by Rabbi Marvin Haya of Los Angeles, and was named for Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter who devoted his entire life to trying to identify and bring to justice Nazi war criminals out of a sense of admiration for the work that he did. And it initially started out as an institution that planned to concentrate on Holocaust education and commemoration, but in the course of the last 32 years has become one of the world's leading, what we call Jewish defense organizations, and its primary focus today is on the fight against contemporary anti-Semitism, extremism, Islamic fundamentalism, terrorism, and the like. So the Wiesenthal Center's main office is the main headquarters, international headquarters, are in Los Angeles, California, where we have a very large and important museum called the Museum of Tolerance, which has exhibitions on the subject of the Holocaust and other cases of ethnic cleansing or genocide, and conducts workshops on tolerance, and is engaged in a wide range of educational activities to help promote tolerance and fight against anti-Semitism, xenophobia, racism, and the like. And we have offices in Jerusalem, in Paris, in Buenos Aires, in Florida, in New York, and in Toronto. And those offices help carry out the work of the Wiesenthal Center and help enlist support for the Wiesenthal Center. Our office in Jerusalem is the office which is entrusted with the task of trying to find, expose, and document the crimes of Nazi war criminals, and to try and help make sure that these people are brought to justice. We're in charge of all the Nazi war crimes investigations. We're the ones who put out the Center's annual report on the investigation and prosecution of Nazi war criminals worldwide. And that's basically in sort of a bird's eye view of our organization.
I also want to mention to the folks that are listening, Simon Wiesenthal Center, and I will put the link up on the website, folks. It will be there. You just click on that, and you can go there and sign up for their weekly newsletter. In that newsletter, you'll find out all kinds of information about how anti-Semitism is on the rise globally. And that's something I want to address right now with Efraim. Efraim, do you feel that, I know you travel around the world quite a lot, as a matter of fact, I think you're going to London in a few days, if I'm not mistaken. Do you
That's correct, yeah.
You're a busy guy, I know. Do you feel that anti-Semitism is on the rise?
Well, I have to say that anti-Semitism has its ups and downs. I think we are now in a more difficult period than we've seen in recent years. Some of that has to do with the outbursts of anti-Semitism in the wake of Operation Cast Lead last year that was designed to stop the shooting of rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israeli civilian cities. And This led to some serious outbreaks of anti-Semitism, and there's also, obviously, the traditional forms of anti-Semitism that we've encountered over the years.
You're listening to The Brent Holland Show. For more information on today's guests, as well as free podcasts and downloads, please go to the www.brenthollandshow.com website, www.brenthollandshow.com.
I would say right now we're facing several particularly serious problems. One is the effort to delegitimize the State of Israel, which is basically a new form of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're not talking about legitimate criticism of Israeli policies and specific Israeli actions, which of course can be criticized, and in certain cases actually should be criticized. But we're talking about singling out Israel out of all the countries in the world for particularly strident criticism and based really on the hatred of Israel, the hatred of the Jewish people, rather than specific facts and specific allegations regarding any specific actions by the Israeli government or by the Israeli Defense Forces. We're also seeing some new forms of anti-Semitism that actually relate to the history of the Holocaust. One is something that I call Holocaust distortion, which is something which is designed to distort the history of the Holocaust for political reasons. And among the issues that are currently under scrutiny by us is this new attempt to try and gain recognition that the crimes of communism are just as bad or worse than the crimes of the Holocaust. Now, on the surface, this doesn't appear to in any way be anti-Semitic. But the fact of the matter is that part of this, I think one of the reasons for this campaign is a certain anti-Semitic sentiment in Eastern Europe, particularly in post-communist Europe, where there was a very high level of collaboration with the Nazis, and where that collaboration was particularly lethal because it included active participation in mass murder that was fueled by traditional anti-Semitism based on religious grounds, on ethnic grounds, nationalistic grounds, economic competition, and the like. And this is something that these peoples, in a sense, want to cover up. Unfortunately, they're not willing to face the truth about their own crimes during the Holocaust. And they hope, by achieving recognition that communism is as bad as Nazism, they hope to create what I call a false symmetry of genocides. Because if communism is the same as Nazism, that means that communism is genocide. And in the minds of many Eastern Europeans, they associate Jews with communism, because there were some Jews who were leaders of the communist movement, and there were Jews who joined the Communist Party. But, of course, their role was not greater. In other words, their percentage was not in any way out of the ordinary of the general population. And whatever crimes they may have committed on behalf of the Communist Party was not out of any sense of allegiance to the Jewish people or to the benefit of the Jewish people. And if that symmetry is created, that communism is genocide, so this will mean that Jews committed genocide. And if Jews committed genocide, then how can they complain about the genocide committed by the local population who cooperated with the Nazis? So this is a total twist of the historical record, of the historical events. And I have to say, regretfully, that there's no question this is at least partially fueled by anti-Semitism.
Where is that emanating from? That doesn't sound quite like Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad is just a complete Holocaust denial.
No, Ahmadinejad is a totally different story. I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
This is being fueled by the countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, the Baltic countries. They're spearheading this campaign. But it also exists in countries like the Ukraine, which is recently, or not that long ago, equalized the extra pensions that were given until now only to people who fought against the Nazis. It's actually given to people whom they consider Ukrainian freedom fighters who collaborated with the Nazis. So that's a classic example of this kind of thing. They try to artificially and falsely inflate the number of righteous among the nations who help Jews without any evidence, and minimize the number of locals who kill Jews, and try to claim that the numbers are equal when in effect in countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, there are far more, many, many, many times more people who participated in murder than those who try to help the local Jews.
I should mention, too, at the outbreak of the Holocaust, Canada's role was deplorable. Our Prime Minister at the time, Mackenzie King, is quoted as saying, "None is too many." And
allow me to correct you. It was not Mackenzie King who said that.
Oh.
To the best of my knowledge, it was actually the Minister of Mines and Resources, Frederick Blair, who was the one responsible for immigration. He had the immigration portfolio in the cabinet, and it was he who made that comment. And having done research on Jewish immigration to Canada during World War II for my thesis, for my PhD, I can tell you that the revelations of the Canadian historians in recent years, in the last 2 decades, about the anti-Semitism that motivated the campaign to keep Jews out of Canada are unfortunately accurate.
There's a very good book also called None is Too Many that is also available, chapters Indigo
right
across the
country.
country.
It's an excellent book. That's an excellent book.
Very well done.
I wholeheartedly agree with you.
I don't want to gloss over Gaza. I do want to talk about that, maybe just in the context of anti-Semitism, because last year they had that goddamn Israel Apartheid Week, and I was the only one in a classroom of 125 people to challenge the fellow that was speaking from Palestine House in Toronto. He had come up to give a lecture. And I asked him point blank, I said, "Do you support Hamas?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Well, wait a second. Hamas's doctrine and their constitution is to eliminate Israel completely, and by extension all the Jews. They don't want Jews anywhere in the Middle East. Do you support that?" He said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Do you support the purposeful targeting of women and children in Israel?" And he said, "Yes." I was the only voice to challenge him on that. Everybody else stayed quiet. The lies that were being told...
Pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic.
The lies that were being told at the university, they were outright lies, and I filed a complaint. I was accosted, a whole long story. Nothing ever happened with it. This is the type of anti-Semitism. I know there's Israeli students there, foreign students that are at Laurentian University here, and they're afraid during that week. This is something that has to be stopped. We have to address this so all students feel welcome and safe, especially in a Western
I certainly agree. I mean, I think it's outrageous that, that this person wasn't challenged. I mean, he's basically not that different than the Nazis, to be perfectly honest. In other words, if he believes in genocide of Jews and the purposely targeting women, children, and the like, I mean, I think luckily these people are honest, I would say, and because they're honest, we understand and we're able to know exactly who this person is, what his ideology is, and what its practical implications are. So I think it's incumbent on all people of goodwill to fight these phenomena.
The reality of Gaza. Can we talk just a little bit about that?
Listen, there's no question that the situation in Gaza is a direct result of the policies of the Hamas government, who, first of all, are not hiding their evil intentions towards Israel. Let's be 100% clear about that. The charter of Hamas, which is the equivalent of their constitution, clearly calls for the elimination of the state of Israel. Their military policies of indiscriminately attacking Israeli civilian centers, cities like Sderot, Ashkelon, even as far as Ashdod, basically show there is absolutely no concern for human life. The way that they use their own people as human shields, for example, shows that there's absolutely no respect for the individual, no obligation to observe the common norms of human rights. And therefore, we find ourselves fighting against a group or a government, if you will, that has absolutely no scruples, no morals, and will do everything in its power to destroy us. So we have absolutely no intention of rolling over and playing dead. And we have every intention of fighting these people until they are simply destroyed or that they change their ideology and are willing to live in peace with Israel.
Absolutely. It's the same ideology Hitler brought forward, the complete elimination of a people.
Right. Listen, this is the problem. And, the attitude, unfortunately, of some of the supposedly enlightened countries in the world is one that is absolutely surprising. In other words, they are giving all sorts of aid, political support to Gaza, when in effect the situation is that the people running the show there are the beneficiaries, which enables them to continue their dictatorship, their fascist genocidal regime, which will certainly not to bring the Middle East any closer to peace.
You're listening to The Brent Holland Show. For more information on today's guests as well as free podcasts and downloads, please go to the www.brenthollandshow.com website, www.brenthollandshow.com.
I don't want to get off the subject because definitely this is an important subject, bringing the Nazi criminals to justice. But I want to make it clear for the students that are listening that are perhaps thinking about taking part in Israel Apartheid Week, that Israel wants peace. They have traded land for peace before with Egypt, with Jordan. They just want to live in peace. Everybody
and with the Palestinians. I mean, we cleared out the Gaza Strip.
Absolutely. And
sorry to interrupt, Brent.
I'm very passionate about this as well. And it seems there's not enough voices speaking about the other side. And it seems, as I said in an op-ed piece that I wrote for the paper, that it's very sexy and in vogue now to beat up on Israel and by extension Jews. And this coming back to what I had said before is scaring the bejesus out of me. And when you say that countries that should know better are taking part again, it makes me wonder if the possibility of it all happening again could take place.
Listen, it could happen. Once it's happened, it can happen again. But of course, at least I think that there's a very strong awareness of the dangers of such a thing happening. And in that respect, you could say that the regime in Iran at the moment and the open call of Ahmadinejad for the destruction of Israel is a test.
I'd like to thank Efraim Zuroff for joining us this afternoon. Coming up next in part 2 of this show.
How helpful has the United Nations been?
Not at all. Not at all. Absolutely no help. And there's no one even thought for a minute that they might want to help.
Let's talk about the United Nations. They've really taken on an adversary role towards Israel. Let's talk about the Goldstone report. Just spend a few minutes on that, if that's okay with you.
There was little information there on the crimes which prompted Gaslit. In other words, the unremittent shelling of Israeli cities and villages, civilian cities and villages. So the problem is clear. No, I think it's very unfortunate that someone who had a solid reputation in the human rights field took this project upon himself, and it was clear that what would emerge was a biased report. This is the tragedy.
Coming up next, Dr. Efraim Zuroff, world's leading Nazi hunter, Operation Last Chance, one man's quest to bring Nazi criminals to justice. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.